He mocked her in front of everyone, until God made him kneel before her. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who thought they were untouchable? Someone who used their power not to heal but to wound? That's where Natalie's story begins. In the bright, sterile corridors of a Seattle hospital, where compassion was supposed to be sacred, and yet, one moment of cruelty would change everything. She was just an ordinary nurse, kind, patient, and often invisible. Her hands had held trembling lives. Her prayers had filled quiet rooms. Yet to Dr. Michael Reed, she was nothing but another face in the crowd. Until the day he humiliated her, in front of doctors, nurses, and patients, breaking her spirit in ways that no diagnosis could describe. He mocked her mistake. He questioned her faith, and he made her believe she wasn't good enough to stand beside him in that operating room. But what Michael didn't know was that God had already written the rest of the story, and it would begin the moment Natalie walked away with tears in her eyes. Years passed, and while Michael's career rose like a tower of pride, his heart slowly began to crumble from within. The man who once thought he needed no one would one day face the same woman he had humiliated. Only this time the roles would be reversed, because grace never forgets. And when God decides to heal a wound, he does it in a way that humbles the proud and lifts the broken. What happens when the woman who was mocked becomes the one who saves the very man who hurt her? This isn't just a story about revenge, and it's a story about redemption, about how God can take the coldest heart and turn it into a vessel of humility and love. Stay until the end. Because when Michael falls to his knees, it won't be out of guilt, it will be out of revelation. Natalie knew the hospital by heart, the way some people know hymns. She could count seconds between elevator dings and code blues. Her badge clicked lightly against her chest like a metronome of mercy. The scent of antiseptic clung to the air, clean and merciless. Seattle rain tapped the windows like a patient knocking from outside. She moved with soft precision, a quiet rhythm learned from pain, and she prayed under her breath the way others breathe without thinking. Her morning began in the break room no one loved. Fluorescent lights hummed above stale coffee and whispered gossip. She chose silence over stories that cut like paper. Her planner brimmed with notes, vitals, meds, tiny hearts of hope. A verse hid in her pocket, folded thin as a promise. God, let me be gentle where life is sharp, she murmured. Outside sirens stitched the city to the day. Natalie charted with a steady, unhurried hand. Every line a witness, pain recorded, dignity preserved. She remembered names others forgot. Cleaners, transport, night staff. She learned the hush before a family's first tear. She learned the courage of a child facing stitches. She learned where the sun entered at 4:17 p.m. each spring. She learned to stay when hope felt late. The interns liked her because she made hard things simple. She labeled syringes as if labeling fear. She explained oxygen like explaining rain to a child. Her smile carried the weight of unprayed prayers. "Thank you, nurse," they said, and meant, "Don't let me drown." She nodded, knowing humility can be a lighthouse. Grace was the language she spoke without grammar. At the board, Natalie scanned assignments like fault lines. Trauma. ICU, a floating slot where storms gathered. Her finger paused at a name. Michael Reed, MD Chief of Surgery, constellation of accolades and shadows. He was brilliant, precise, the city's favorite roomer. People admired him from a distance like lightning. Up close, the air felt thin. They had met in moments measured by monitors. His eyes were clocks. Hers were churches. He asked for results. She offered patients' stories. Facts, he said once, save lives, not feelings. She swallowed kindness like a stone and carried on. They orbited the same wounded planets differently. Today their orbits would collide. The call came at 9:06, clipped and cold. "Pre-op ready for Reed, Page anesthesia now." Natalie answered, voice steady as a bridge. Her shoes squeaked along the polished corridor spine. She passed a mother gripping a teddy bear like a railing. "God be near," Natalie breathed as she smiled. The mother nodded as if hearing him. Pre-op beds lined up like held breaths. Curtains made little rooms of trembling privacy. Natalie checked armbands, double-checked allergies, triple-checked hope. She adjusted blankets with reverence reserved for fear. A teen with freckles clung to courage by thread. "You're safe," Natalie said, and meant it stubbornly. Safety sometimes begins with someone who believes it. Michael entered the way weather enters a story. Air pressure changed. Conversation shortened, spines straightened. He scanned charts like scanning a battlefield map. Orders fell from his mouth clean as scalpels. "Who prepped bed 3? he asked without looking. I did, Natalie said, notebook already open. He lifted his gaze, precision not welcome. Bed 3 was a man with a scar of years. His wife, small and fierce, held his hand. Natalie had prayed silently while taping the IV. Now Michael fired questions like tests of worth. When silence landed heavy, Natalie filled the gaps. The wife exhaled with grateful, breaking eyes. Michael's jaw tightened like a door. Vitals? He snapped as if speed were salvation. Stable, Natalie answered, handing the printed strip. He flipped a page, finding a minor discrepancy. A dose transcribed at 7:12 instead of 7:10. 2 minutes. Harmless, common, already corrected. But pride can turn dust into thunder. He looked at Natalie as if she were a lesson. Details get people killed, he said, voice sharp. The room shrank around the word killed. Natalie didn't flinch, but her pulse did. I corrected it immediately, doctor, documented here. She pointed calmly, offering the proof like bread. The wife watched, fear learning a new shape. Michael considered mercy and chose precision. They moved toward the scrub sinks, water hissing. Steel reflected faces as blunt, unforgiving truths. Natalie washed her hands like washing yesterday off. Michael scrubbed as if perfection were a ritual. Stay close, he said, meaning, don't fail again. She nodded, meaning, I will carry what you drop. Rain crawled down the windows like second thoughts. In the hallway, 2 interns whispered static. He's a legend, just don't disappoint him. Everyone disappoints a storm, the other sighed. Natalie passed them with her quiet armor on. Kindness stitched to courage, courage stitched to prayer. She had survived worse than weather and words, but old scars tingled like prophecy. The OR doors sighed open like a chest relieved. Lights swung down like moons over a pale sea. Machines hummed, instruments glittered, time sharpened. The anesthesiologist nodded, rhythm already set. Natalie's hands laid out tools like a supper. Ready, she said, voice feathered and firm. Michael's gaze measured her to the decimal. Induction, incision, the choreography of trust began. Numbers danced across monitors in green constellations. Beneath blue drapes, a life became a map. Michael moved with the accuracy of practiced storms. Clamp, he said. Natalie placed faith in steel. Retract, he said. She parted fear from flesh. Good, he said once, thin as vapor. A subtle drop in pressure drew the room tighter. Natalie saw it first, the way shepherds see wolves. She spoke softly, offering data, not drama. Map trending down, vasoactive ready at hand. The anesthesiologist confirmed, adjusting with quiet skill. Michael corrected course without wasting syllables. The numbers rose like breath returning. Minutes passed that felt like years sorting themselves. Sweat debated Michael's forehead but lost. Natalie anticipated the next 10 seconds precisely. A dance learned from losing and refusing to quit. Her hands were steady, her eyes a harbor. When fear knocked, she answered with work. When pride spoke, she listened past it. Then a nurse at the periphery misspoke a dosage. A slip of tongue, not a practice. Michael's head snapped, accusation preloaded. Natalie spoke up gently, truth before blame. Already corrected on the chart, verbal slip only. Silence hung like a trial with no jury. Michael's stare found Natalie again, hunting. In that pause, something fragile cracked. Not the patient, he was steady as a hymn. It was the thin ice between excellence and cruelty. Michael's need to be flawless sharpened to a blade. He turned the room into a witness stand. Professionalism means zero tolerance for carelessness, he said. The sentence reached for Natalie's throat. The case concluded with the dignity life deserved. Sutures closed like prayers tied with thread. Applause doesn't exist in operating rooms, only relief. The anesthesiologist exhaled the ghost of tension. Natalie organized instruments the way calm organizes chaos. Michael removed gloves like leaving a battlefield. The room exhaled him, then inhaled itself again. In post-op, Natalie briefed the wife softly. His numbers look good, recovery will start slow. The woman's gratitude trembled like a leaf. God bless you, she whispered with both hands. Natalie smiled, eyes glassy with borrowed hope. Blessings often arrive with their coats still wet. Rain kept tapping the window like an amen. By noon, the board changed like a sky. Another complex case, another page, Dr. Reed. Natalie's name appeared beneath his again. Fate isn't always poetic, but it is consistent. She sipped lukewarm coffee, tasting metal and memory. Something cold moved behind her ribs. The day wasn't finished being sharp. In the corridor, a resident dropped a folder. Papers skittered like frightened birds across tile. Natalie knelt, gathering scattered wings of data. Michael rounded the corner, speed dressed as purpose. He saw the mess, then saw her. "Is this your standard of readiness?" he asked. The resident froze and time complied. Natalie rose with the file already sorted. "His doctor, misstep not neglect," she said evenly. She returned the pages to trembling hands. Michael studied Natalie like a problem set. Precision can become cruelty when love leaves. He chose the scalpel of words again. The hallway gathered an audience like rain gathers puddles. "Details," he said, voice pitched for the crowd, "are the difference between living and not living." Eyes shifted toward Natalie as if cued. Her spine lifted, quiet as a lighthouse. "I agree," she answered, the courage of small things. "But details include truth, not theater." The air went thinner than glass. He stepped closer, thunder rehearsed in his mouth. Old pride masked as new conviction. "Then show me truth in your notes," he said. Her notebook was already open. Order, clarity, care. She offered it without shaking, a cup of water. He refused to drink before looking inside. That was when the first laugh, not hers, arrived. It came from somewhere behind a coat, low, careless, the kind that stains. Michael didn't laugh, but he didn't stop it. "Humiliation doesn't need a chorus. One note poisons." The resident stared at the floor, learning silence. Natalie felt the corridor tilt toward a wound. God felt closer than everyone else in the room. She closed the notebook like closing a door. "Shall we go save someone now?" she asked softly. The question floated like a lifeboat in storm. Michael's eyes flickered, annoyance, then something lonelier. But pride chose the next hour for him. "Or in 10, he said and turned. Natalie inhaled, steadied, and walked toward the light. The rain did not stop that night. It simply changed rhythm. Seattle's skyline blurred behind a silver curtain, as if heaven wanted to hide the city's pride. Inside the hospital, fluorescent lights hummed their endless confession. Natalie finished her shift in silence, her body heavy but her heart strangely awake. Words unsaid pressed behind her ribs like unbroken waves. She had been humiliated before, but not like this. This time it felt personal, surgical, and yet, under all the ache, something sacred stirred. Restraint, not revenge. She walked past the chapel on her way out, its door slightly open. Inside, a single candle flickered against the draft, defiant in its smallness. Natalie sat in the back pew, letting the quiet mend what pride had bruised. "Lord," she whispered, "teach me to stay kind when kindness hurts." Her voice trembled like rain against stained glass. She didn't ask for justice, she asked for peace, the rarer miracle. And in that stillness she felt seen, not by men, but by God. Michael, meanwhile, sat in his office overlooking the parking lot. He could see his reflection in the window, successful, feared, unfulfilled. He replayed the corridor scene without sound, as if muting the shame could undo it. She hadn't argued. She hadn't fought. Her composure had unsettled him more than tears would have. Why didn't she defend herself? He muttered, tapping a pen that no longer wrote. But the question was really about himself. There was a loneliness that power couldn't silence. His reputation had become a fortress, and fortresses rarely let anyone in. The night staff knocked lightly before entering his office, always cautious. Even their politeness felt like distance. Michael had once believed excellence would heal his childhood hunger for approval. Instead, it only starved him differently. The sound of his own name on others' lips had become applause, not affection. Natalie's bus ride home was long and quiet. Streetlights streaked across the window, turning raindrops into slow tears. She thought of quitting, of finding a smaller place where hearts mattered more than titles. But something inside her whispered, not yet. She had always felt assigned, not employed in that hospital. "Maybe God put me there for more than pain," she said under her breath. And somehow that thought steadied her. At home, her small apartment smelled of lavender and coffee grounds. She hung her uniform like hanging up armor after battle. The city buzzed faintly through the window, alive and indifferent. Natalie lit a candle, opened her worn Bible, and read until her eyes softened. Every verse sounded like a promise trying to remember itself. "Be still and know that I am God," she whispered. And the verse held her until sleep did. Morning brought no apology, only routine. Michael passed her in the hallway with a nod so faint it could have been wind. She returned it with quiet grace, no resentment, no invitation. Still something flickered in his chest like guilt pretending to be logic. He told himself he had no reason to feel sorry. Authority required distance. But the human heart does not always obey the logic of the mind. His did not that morning. By noon, a pediatric emergency shattered the rhythm of the day. A 7-year-old boy with a congenital defect was rushed in. Michael took charge, voice firm, command sharp. Natalie was already there, steady and precise, her calm contagious. For a moment, the storm between them paused. Life had no room for ego. Together, they fought for the boy's fragile heartbeat. Time became a prayer with gloves on. When the monitor finally leveled, Michael exhaled for the first time in hours. He turned toward Natalie, sweat glistening at his temples. Her eyes met his, not cold, not proud, just present. "Good work," he said, words heavier than intended. "Good teamwork," she corrected softly, cleaning instruments with deliberate grace. He didn't argue. For once, silence didn't feel like control, it felt like humility learning to speak. Something shifted, small and almost holy. That night, he stayed late again, reviewing the case. He saw her notes, her precision, her quiet perfectionism. Each line revealed the truth he had ignored. She was exceptional. Not just skilled, but steady. And that steadiness had kept more than one life breathing, including his pride unknowingly. He set the folder down, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in years, the great Dr. Reed felt small in a good way. Natalie, at home, didn't know he was thinking of her. She folded laundry, listening to the city hum like a restless soul. She thought about her patience, about grace in motion, about letting go. Her heart didn't crave revenge anymore, it longed for meaning. She smiled faintly, realizing that humility wasn't weakness. It was strength in disguise. And maybe, just maybe, God was preparing a story she couldn't see yet. One where the man who mocked her would one day kneel not to her but beside her. Morning cracked open like glass under rain. Seattle wore its gray crown with weary grace. Natalie tied her hair, armor made of calm. The hospital buzzed like a hive of unfinished prayers. A memo flashed. Boardwalk through at 2 p.m. Whispers traveled faster than stretchers on tile. Somewhere old tension stretched its fingers. Michael arrived before sunrise, sharp and spotless. Coffee cooled beside untouched charts. His eyes were engines. His chest a locked room. He reread yesterday's pediatric case, circled nothing. Perfection left him no place to rest. He practiced control until even silence obeyed. Today, silence would learn to say no. The first emergency arrived without courtesy. A construction worker, crushed ribs, bleeding stubbornly. "Or two," Michael said, voice like a scalpel. Natalie had the instruments waiting before his sentence ended. Their choreography found its old, reluctant rhythm. Clamp, retract, stitch, breath returned to the world. Applause again postponed. Life again permitted. Post-op recovery hummed like a bruise healing. Natalie charted with script-like clarity and care. She noticed Michael rubbing his right hand briefly. A tremor, small as a secret, large as a cliff. He hid it inside his pocket, made of pride. She pretended not to see mercy in practice. He pretended nothing hurt, survival in habit. Noon sharpened. Pagers pierced the quiet. A donor luncheon filled the conference hall. Executives smiled like well-placed paintings. A news crew set up bright, hostile lights. Michael was scheduled for a live interview. "City's miracle hands," the banner declared, mercilessly kind. His jaw clenched at the word hands. Natalie passed the hall carrying fresh linens. She caught the headline, felt a sting of irony. The man who cut with perfection was cutting himself now. Not with blades, but with the fear of failure. She whispered, "God, be near where pride is loud." The words floated past suits and spotlights unseen. He felt them anyway, like warmth behind glass. A code blue shattered the donor's polished calm. Elevators choked on bodies sprinting to the third floor. Natalie dropped linens, picked up purpose mid-run. Michael turned from the camera without apology. The crew followed, predatory and breathless. Pain does not pause for public relations. Neither did grace. Room 317 was a storm inside four walls. An elderly pastor gasped between drowning lungs. His wife clutched a Bible the size of memory. "Please," she breathed. "Help him. He still has sermons." Michael's gaze mapped the failing numbers fast. "BiPAP now, prepare for intubation," he ordered. Natalie steadied the air with practiced hands. Heat built under the camera's relentless gaze. The room became theater against its will. Sweat gathered at Michael's hairline like doubt. His right hand trembled around the laryngoscope handle. Not dramatic, just enough to misplace confidence. He swallowed, found no moisture, only noise. Natalie stepped closer without stepping on pride. "Doctor," she said softly, "I've got the angle." He hesitated. A king without a throne, seconds strained, oxygen burned, time accused. She met his eyes, no pity, just presence. He nodded once, a surrender shaped like wisdom. Together they aligned breath with possibility. The tube slid past panic into mercy. The monitor's tone softened to something human. The pastor's chest found a rhythm that forgave. His wife wept the kind of gratitude that kneels. Michael exhaled, a man stepping off a ledge. Natalie secured the line, efficient, invisible, essential. The camera captured everything except what mattered most. God's fingerprints do not show on film. Applause leaked from the hallway. Wrong room, wrong time. The news anchor whispered, "We got gold." Michael removed his gloves like peeling off pride. His right hand shook again, smaller, truer. He hid it in a pocket of perfection. Natalie pretended to rearrange supplies. Neither spoke of earthquakes with names. Back in the corridor, the board appeared. 5 suits, 6 verdicts, 1 polite smile. "Impressive," said the chair, rehearsed and thin. "Would you join us for the live segment?" Michael nodded, the word hands echoing. He looked at his hands and saw history. He looked at Natalie and saw help. The interview began under surgical lights of media. Questions flew like needles threaded with praise. Legend, genius, miracle, and labels like heavy jewelry. Michael answered with careful modesty that wasn't. Then the anchor turned sharp as a corner. A viral clip of staff conflict surfaced this week. Thoughts? The hospital went quieter than prayer. On the screen, the corridor from Chapter 1. Not all of it, just the worst 50 seconds. A laugh not hers. A stare like a blade. His voice pitched for the crowd, cut free of context. The internet never airs the whole lung, only the breath that hurts the most. The board studied him like a specimen. Michael's mouth opened and found no language. Pride has many dialects. Humility, just one. He felt the tremor return, not only physical. The anchor smiled, hunting contrition for ratings. "Do you regret your tone with nursing staff?" The hospital listened for a verdict called truth. Natalie watched from the doorway, still as a lighthouse. He could defend. He could minimize. He could say the clip was incomplete. He could paint himself in sterilized nuance. Instead, something finally unclenched inside. "Yes," he said. "I was wrong." The words fell like instruments into waiting hands. Silence healed by knowing what to hold. "I forgot people are not procedures," he continued. "My standards stayed high. My mercy fell low. I owe my team respect before excellence. I owe one nurse especially an apology." The anchor blinked. Drama had become repentance. Repentance rarely trends, but heaven notices. The board found their pens suddenly heavier. The segment ended without fireworks, only rain. Michael stepped away, a man lighter by honesty. He searched the hallway with untrained humility. Natalie stood near the chapel sign, unmoved by cameras. He approached like someone returning a borrowed timepiece. "I'm sorry," he said, voice unarmored, real. For the corridor, the words, the audience. Natalie held his gaze the way anchors hold ships. "I hear you," she said, not rushing grace. "Respect is not a speech, it's a rhythm. Keep it long enough, people learn the song." He nodded, the first lesson taken without defense. Rain traced the window like gentle correction. Somewhere, the ICU monitor sang a soft amen. An overhead page called him back to duty. He turned, then stopped, hand almost steady. "Thank you for room 317, he added. "You saved my patient," she replied simply. "You saved me from myself," he almost said. But humility keeps some sentences for later. He walked away on quieter shoes. News traveled, but not the right parts. Some staff gossiped. Others quietly hoped. Natalie returned to work like prayer returns to breath. She checked on the pastor, stable, sleeping, held. His wife squeezed her fingers with grateful strength. "God sent you," the woman whispered. "God sent us all," Natalie answered. Evening draped the hospital in patient shadows. Michael stood alone at the window, hand open. The tremor came, then faded, then forgot him. He remembered the look in Natalie's eyes, steady. He remembered the word rhythm and felt found. A strange thought knocked, ask for help. He did not yet know how. Natalie walked past the chapel once more. The candle still fought the draft and won. She sat for a minute and let the day exhale. Forgiveness stood beside her like a trusted friend. Not finished, not naive, simply willing. "Teach us both, Lord," she prayed softly. Outside, the rain finally became gentle. Before midnight, a text reached the staff feed. Mandatory skills review, interdisciplinary, led by Nurse Natalie. Approved by Chief of Surgery Dr. Reed. The thread exploded with question marks and awe. Natalie read it twice, heart steady, not surprised. Respect had chosen a place to start singing. Tomorrow, the hospital would hear a new song. The next morning began not with alarms but with whispers. Every hallway seemed to hum with expectation. Natalie arrived early, hair pulled back, notebook in hand. The conference room was already arranged. Chairs in a half circle, projector humming like an insect caught in light. A tray of coffee cooling between nervous glances. For once, she wasn't just the listener, she was the voice. Outside, gray clouds draped Seattle like unfinished thoughts. Rain misted against wide hospital windows, each droplet racing the next toward gravity's end. Natalie drew a slow breath, praying beneath the noise. "Use me, Lord, even if I'm shaking." Her pulse echoed between ribs like a drum of purpose. Peace didn't mean calm. It meant courage anyway. Michael entered just as the clock struck 8. His lab coat carried less authority today, more honesty. He greeted her quietly. No title, no performance. "Natalie, thank you for doing this," he said, his tone stripped of hierarchy and weight. She nodded once, professionalism meeting mercy. The tremor in his hand was gone, but humility remained. Staff trickled in. Residents, nurses, techs, even janitors. Curiosity filled the seats before instructions did. Michael took a chair, not the front, not the center. That small choice spoke louder than any apology. Natalie stepped forward, heart steady, voice clear. "Today isn't about mistakes," she began softly. "It's about listening to patients and to each other." Her slides were simple: compassion, communication, care. But her eyes carried what slides couldn't: conviction. She told stories of patients who healed faster because someone remembered their child's name. Of teams that worked better when dignity wasn't optional. Of small mercies disguised as tasks. Each word landed like warm rain on tired soil. Michael listened, head lowered, pen still. Each sentence undid another knot in his chest. He'd built his career on precision. She built hers on presence. Both saved lives, but only one healed souls. He realized leadership wasn't control, it was service. When she said excellence begins with empathy, he wrote it down as if it were a prescription. A resident raised his hand, nervous but brave. "Do you really think grace fits in medicine?" Natalie smiled gently, the kind of answer that breathes. "Grace fits anywhere people do," she said. "Even in chart notes, even in operating rooms." A ripple of quiet agreement moved through the crowd. Michael felt the truth like oxygen returning. During a short break, she stood by the window. The rain had softened to silver dust. Michael approached, uncertain, careful not to break the moment. "Your words," he said. "They hit something I forgot I had." She turned slightly, half smile, half forgiveness. "We all forget," she said. "That's why God reminds." He wanted to thank her, but gratitude stuck in awe. When the session ended, applause rose unplanned. It wasn't loud, it was sincere. Some clapped softly, some nodded like witnesses. Michael stayed seated, eyes glistening unannounced. Natalie gathered her notes without rushing. "Thank you all," she said, steady as grace. "The hardest hearts only need one open door." Later in the cafeteria, she sat alone by choice. She liked the sound of trays instead of praise. Michael joined her with 2 coffees, no ceremony. "I owe you one," he said, sliding hers forward. She met his gaze, playful, kind, unguarded. "You owe me respect," she teased. "But I'll take caffeine." They both laughed, the first sound lighter than memory. He leaned back, something new softening his frame. "You know," he said, "I thought control kept me strong." She stirred her coffee, eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes strength is letting God drive the scalpel." He blinked, the sentence lingering like incense. Faith had always been her language, not his. But now he wanted to learn it fluently. Their shifts crossed again by providence, not planning. In the ER, chaos returned, familiar and loud. A multi-vehicle crash flooded the bay with sirens. Michael took command with calm that wasn't pride. Natalie was there before orders, anticipating need. They moved like a prayer answered in teamwork. Lives were saved, but something else too. A rhythm reborn. Amid adrenaline and antiseptic, he saw her anew. Not as the nurse he'd corrected, but as grace personified. Every time she comforted a patient, faith took shape. Every calm instruction was a hymn unsung. He caught himself watching, humbled by the holy ordinary. And in that awe, ego finally lost its pulse. Something sacred entered its place. Respect. By evening, exhaustion found them both in the hallway. "Another miracle," Natalie sighed, adjusting her badge. "Not mine," Michael replied. "Ours." The word carried weight he didn't notice before. They stood side by side, strangers made allies. The world outside still stormed, but peace lived here. Their silence now spoke fluently of change. He walked her to the parking lot without planning. The rain had stopped, the air tasted new. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Once," she said, "when kindness felt wasted." He nodded, remembering the mirror he'd been. "Well," he said, voice low, "I'm glad you stayed." Her smile was answer enough. At home, Natalie journaled beneath dim light. The day spilled across paper like grace spilled over wounds. Forgiveness no longer felt like labor, it felt like freedom. She wrote, "God humbles the proud to heal the broken, sometimes both at once." Outside, a church bell tolled against the drizzle. She closed her notebook with quiet reverence. Tomorrow she would walk into that hospital unafraid. Michael, too, wrote that night for the first time in years. He wrote no research, no notes, just confession. "I mistook fear for authority. She showed me courage in silence." He didn't pray, not yet, but gratitude became his language. He set down his pen and looked at his hands. The tremor had vanished like a storm that spent itself. He whispered, "Thank you," unsure if heaven heard. Midnight found both awake beneath different roofs. The city pulsed between them, quiet and alive. Rain began again, gentle as forgiveness itself. Each drop a promise, story still unfolding. Neither knew what the next day would hold, but both felt the same invisible truth. Redemption had already started its surgery. The morning broke clean and deceptively calm. Seattle's skyline shimmered with reluctant light after a night of rain. The hospital stood tall, unaware that storms sometimes start indoors. Natalie arrived early, her smile genuine, unaware of whispers brewing. Transformation often invites opposition. Change unsettles the comfortable. A few staff members still clung to the old Michael, not the humbled one. And gossip always finds work before grace does. Rumors fluttered through the corridors like paper birds. "Did you see the chief at her training session?" Someone murmured. "They say he's favoring her now," another replied with envy thinly disguised. Natalie overheard but didn't react. Silence remained her best defense, but inside her heart ached. She had only tried to serve well. Faith, she reminded herself, is tested not in peace but in misunderstanding, so she kept her focus on patience, not noise. Michael noticed the sudden shift in tone when he entered meetings. Colleagues exchanged glances like secret handshakes. He'd built allies through fear. Now humility confused them. His apology to Natalie had made headlines within the hospital's gossip mill. Some admired him for it. Others saw it as weakness. But for the first time, he didn't care about opinions. He cared about truth, and truth was quieter than applause. That afternoon, a special surgery was scheduled. A young girl, age 9. A risky cardiac repair, the kind that made or unmade reputations. Michael had done dozens, but this one felt personal. The girl reminded him of his sister, gone too soon years before. Natalie prepped the room with reverent precision, humming softly. Music of faith filled sterile air. He watched her work and found his nerves easing. Halfway through preparation, the hospital director entered. "Dr. Reed," she said, "we'd like to record this procedure for training." Michael hesitated. The last time cameras came, truth bled. But he nodded. He had nothing to hide anymore. Natalie glanced at him, understanding his unspoken dread. He met her gaze and found quiet courage reflected back. Maybe redemption required visibility this time. The surgery began with sacred focus. Monitors blinked like constellations in an artificial sky. The child's heartbeat filled the room like fragile hope. Michael's hands moved with prayer disguised as science. Natalie anticipated every command, every breath, every need. But midway through, an unexpected bleed erupted, a tear too deep, too sudden. Gasps froze the air. The camera didn't stop rolling. Pressure rose like panic trying to find a way out. Michael barked orders out of instinct, not arrogance. "Clamp now!" he shouted, sweat tracing his temples. Natalie acted before he finished the word. Precise, calm, ready. Her movements restored rhythm to chaos. her faith steady as heartbeat. The monitor steadied after what felt like an eternity. Then silence, holy, heavy silence, fell over the room. The director exhaled audibly from behind the glass. "Close," Michael whispered, voice almost breaking. He didn't mean the incision. He meant the distance between failure and faith. When the final suture was tied, Natalie's gloves trembled slightly. He noticed not to correct, but to care. "You were incredible," he said softly. Her answer was simple. So was God. Afterward, the footage made rounds across departments. It wasn't the complication that people discussed. It was the calm. A still image of Natalie steadying the line spread like quiet wildfire. "She saved the case," someone said. "She saved him too," another added. Michael pretended not to hear, but gratitude burned through his chest.
Humility, he realized, could be contagious.
And maybe redemption wasn't meant to stay private. But every story of grace attracts shadows. Dr. Collins, senior cardiologist, saw the video differently. He'd envied Michael's rise for years, tolerated his fall, resented his recovery. "Looks staged," he muttered in the boardroom. No nurse runs a surgery. Jealousy, slick and polite, disguised itself as professionalism. He proposed an internal review of the case protocol. Michael smiled faintly. Storms always test the rebuilt walls. The review summoned Natalie as well. She stood before a semicircle of suits, unshaken. Questions rained like arrows, technical but tinted with bias. Her answers flowed clear and factual, never defensive. "Did Dr. Reed lose control?" one board member asked. "He didn't lose control," she said calmly. "He found trust." Silence followed, the kind that reveals more than words. Michael entered next, coat crisp, humility intact. He addressed the board without notes or filters. "Every surgeon depends on a team," he began. "I used to think excellence meant isolation. I was wrong." He looked toward Natalie before continuing. "She taught me that grace saves what skill alone cannot." The board didn't applaud, but heaven probably did. Later that evening, Natalie found him in the chapel. He was seated in the last pew, hands clasped, head bowed. She hesitated before joining him in the quiet. "I didn't expect to see you here," she whispered. "Neither did I," he admitted, voice fragile but sure. "I wanted to say thank you, not for defending me, but for believing in me first." Her eyes softened. Belief is easy when God is in it. They sat in silence, the candles' glow painting gold across regret. The sound of rain returned, softer this time. Michael finally spoke, barely audible. "I prayed today." "What did you say?" she asked gently. "That I'd stop trying to fix everything with my hands." She smiled, tears gathering like dawn at her lashes. "Then you finally learned what healing means." When they left the chapel, something shifted. They didn't walk apart this time. Their steps aligned naturally, like a hymn rediscovered. Outside, the city lights blinked through drizzle like distant halos. Michael held the door for her, not as a gesture, but gratitude. Natalie looked up, her voice a whisper of faith. "Redemption looks good on you, doctor." He laughed softly, almost shyly. "I think it looks better when shared." The rain thickened, but neither cared. For the first time, they didn't rush the good moments away. The storm that once divided them now felt like music. Somewhere in the city, a bell chimed the hour of new beginnings, and heaven perhaps leaned closer to listen. That night, Natalie dreamed of open skies and second chances. Michael dreamed of the same chapel candle refusing to die. Grace had stitched two wounded hearts into one rhythm. The city still slept in storms, but peace had learned their names. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but they would not face them alone. The surgeon and the nurse, two halves of one redeemed story. And God wasn't finished writing it yet. The following week began with headlines, not rain. Local news outlets replayed clips from the surgery. "Miracle in Seattle Hospital." The captions read in bold, flattering tones. Michael's name trended again. This time with reverence, not ridicule. But praise, like lightning, can burn as easily as it lights. He felt the warmth of recognition turning into the chill of expectation. Every compliment carried the weight of who he used to be. Natalie walked through the corridors quietly, avoiding cameras. She had no interest in fame, only faithfulness. Yet everywhere she went, someone whispered her name with admiration. A janitor paused just to thank her for her calm under pressure. A patient handed her a note that simply said, "You made the room feel safe." Kindness, it seemed, had become contagious. Still, humility wore heavier than pride ever had. The hospital board decided to capitalize on their success. "Let's host a press conference," the director said brightly. "Show the city what compassion and innovation look like together." Michael hesitated. He knew what public attention could do. But Natalie encouraged him with quiet certainty. Maybe God wants the story heard, not for us but for others. And somehow that made him say yes. Preparations began. Banners, press kits, rehearsed speeches. Michael hated the pretense but honored the purpose. He insisted Natalie share the stage beside him. "She deserves to be recognized," he told the team. Some agreed, others rolled their eyes quietly. Old hierarchies die slower than hearts change. Still, truth had already chosen its stage. The day of the conference dawned clear and deceptive. Cameras filled the hospital lobby like a sea of blinking eyes. Reporters adjusted microphones, the air electric with curiosity. Michael stood ready, notes untouched in his hands. Natalie stood beside him, posture calm, presence luminous. She wore the same necklace she always did, a small silver cross. And somehow it glimmered brighter under the fluorescent lights. He began with gratitude, not grandeur. He spoke of teamwork, faith, and lessons in humility. He credited Natalie for saving not just the patient, but his perspective. Applause rippled across the room like a restrained wave. Natalie smiled, unguarded, until a voice cut through the crowd. "Is it true you falsified recovery data on that surgery?" The room went silent, Grace suddenly on trial. A reporter stepped forward, waving a printed document. Anonymous claims, technical jargon, accusations dressed as facts. Michael's heart stuttered once, but his eyes stayed steady. He knew it was Collins, the jealous colleague with a grudge. Natalie's breath caught, her instincts screaming for calm. "Dr. Reed," the reporter pressed, "did you hide complications?" Every camera turned into an unblinking judge. Michael's old reflexes flared, the urge to defend, deflect, dominate. But this time, pride found no pulse. He drew a breath and spoke with quiet conviction. No data was falsified. Every chart is open for review. He paused, letting integrity steady his voice. Medicine isn't perfect, but we never lie about the fight for life. Natalie watched, a prayer behind every heartbeat. The reporter turned his focus toward her. "Nurse Natalie, did you witness any irregularities?" The question sliced between professionalism and trust. Her palms felt suddenly heavy, but her soul stayed firm. She looked at Michael, then at the cameras, then heavenward. "No," she said clearly. "I witnessed courage, not corruption." The crowd exhaled like one body rediscovering oxygen. Still, whispers lingered after the applause. Doubt once spoken echoes longer than truth. Collins filed an official inquiry, determined to stain redemption. For days, Michael lived under the microscope of scrutiny. Every file, every timestamp, every heartbeat rechecked. Natalie stood beside him through it all, quiet but unwavering. Faith doesn't need a platform, it just stays. One evening, Michael sat in his office alone. The investigation had drained what pride hadn't already taken. He stared at the city lights like distant, unreachable stars. The door creaked softly. Natalie entered, 2 coffees in hand. "They'll clear you soon," she said, voice steady. He nodded, eyes distant, tone worn thin. "I don't fear the outcome. I fear the old me." She set the cup down gently beside his files. "Then don't go back there," she said softly. "God didn't bring you this far to make you rehearse pain." He looked at her, studying the quiet certainty in her face. "How do you trust so easily after what I did?" he asked. She smiled faintly, tears behind composure. "Because grace doesn't audit the past, it rewrites it." The review ended days later, no fault found, full exoneration. The board offered congratulations, some genuine, some forced. Collins avoided eye contact, defeated but unrepentant. Michael declined interviews, declined celebrations, declined revenge. Instead, he requested a day off, unusual, almost radical. He spent it not in rest, but in reflection. Healing, he realized, often feels like holy exhaustion. He drove to a small lake outside the city. Clouds hung low, sunlight trembling through their edges. He walked the pier, wind lifting his coat like wings. There he prayed again, this time out loud. "Lord, don't let me heal only in reputation. Heal my heart too." His voice broke on the word heart. The sound was both confession and completion. Natalie joined him hours later, unplanned. She'd found the note he left with his schedule. "I figured you'd be here," she said softly. He turned, surprise mixing with warmth. "You really think God sent you again?" She smiled, looking at the water. He never stopped. And the still lake reflected something almost divine. They sat on the pier, hands resting close but not touching. Words felt unnecessary between two people rebuilt by grace. Seagulls cut through the silence, wings bright against gray sky. He turned slightly, voice hushed by reverence. I don't deserve this, any of it. Natalie looked up, her eyes gentle but firm. That's why it's called mercy, Michael. Rain began softly, the kind that doesn't chase you indoors. Drops dimpled the water like heaven writing in Morse code. He reached for her hand, not to claim, but to thank. Their fingers met between tremor and trust. No vow spoken, yet something eternal began. For once love wasn't loud, it was honest. And honesty felt holy. They left the lake as the sun broke through. Light spilled across wet boards like spilled forgiveness. The drive back was quiet, sacred in its simplicity. Two lives once divided by pride, now driven by peace. Michael glanced at her, seeing not a nurse but a miracle. Natalie caught his look and whispered, We're both still healing. He smiled. Then let's not stop. That night, Seattle slept under a silver moon. The hospital glowed softly in the distance. A beacon not of power but of redemption lived out loud. Inside, patients dreamed while machines hummed like lullabies. And somewhere, two hearts beat in new rhythm, no longer surgeon and nurse but partners in grace. The kind of story heaven writes in rain and light. The hospital buzzed louder than usual that morning. A new program had been approved, Healing with Heart. It was Michael's proposal, written in partnership with Natalie. Workshops for emotional intelligence, empathy, and patient connection. The board called it innovative. Natalie called it answered prayer. Their idea had grown from their scars, not their titles. And soon it would touch more lives than either expected. Reporters once again crowded the lobby, but the tone was different. This time they came not for gossip, but for grace. Michael adjusted his tie with a calm he'd never known. Natalie stood beside him, holding a binder of notes, her confidence gentle but radiant, like faith in motion. He leaned toward her before the cameras rolled. Whatever happens today, he whispered, we already won. The conference began with the hum of expectation. Michael spoke not like a surgeon, but like a servant. He talked of healing as both science and soul. He mentioned how mistakes had become miracles in disguise. And when he said Natalie's name, his voice softened. She taught me that humility doesn't make you smaller. It makes room for God. Applause rose, not for fame, but for truth. Natalie's turn came, and the room shifted. Her words carried warmth that facts couldn't hold. We treat broken bones every day, she said. But broken spirits take longer. She shared stories of patients who healed faster when hope was present. How kindness shortened recovery. How prayer steadied hands. Medicine saves bodies, she concluded. Love saves everything else. Even the press fell silent, sacred silence, not awkward. After the conference, invitations flooded their inboxes. Universities wanted Michael to speak on faith in leadership. Hospitals requested Natalie's training model for empathy workshops. The two exchanged glances, amused and amazed. Looks like God's PR team is better than ours, she joked. He laughed, his arm brushing hers as they walked. Remind me to never doubt your faith again. Days passed in a rhythm of gratitude and grace. They worked together seamlessly, purpose braided into routine. Sometimes in the cafeteria, sometimes side by side in surgery. Their partnership became the hospital's quiet heartbeat. Even skeptics began to believe transformation was real. Michael didn't chase perfection anymore. He pursued presence. And Natalie found peace where pressure used to live. But peace, like all holy things, is tested. One Friday evening, a call came. Multi-casualty highway crash. Dozens injured, chaos pouring in through ambulance doors. Michael and Natalie arrived within minutes, their calm contagious. He directed trauma teams. She triaged with fierce compassion. For hours they worked without pause or pride. Faith became muscle memory under adrenaline. Mid-crisis, a young boy coded, collapsed lung critical. Michael ran to assist, shouting for a pediatric set. A nurse froze under pressure, shaking, eyes wide. Natalie stepped in, voice firm but kind. I've got it. She positioned the child while Michael made the incision. Breath returned with a gasp that felt like grace exhaled. Their eyes met. No words, only reverence. When the chaos cleared, exhaustion filled the silence. Patients stabilized, families cried, heaven took inventory. Michael leaned against a wall, sweat tracing his jaw. Natalie approached, handing him water with a half smile. "Miracle count today?" she teased softly. He chuckled, voice rough. "Too many to list." "Then let's just call it one big one," she said. By morning, headlines praised the hospital's unity. Michael was hailed as a hero again, but he redirected credit. "I'm surrounded by extraordinary hearts," he told reporters. He gestured toward Natalie standing behind him, and for a moment the cameras caught something deeper than story. A look of mutual respect wrapped in quiet affection. Grace had become visible, almost photogenic. A week later, the board called them into a meeting. "We'd like to promote you both," the chair said, smiling. Michael would lead a new department for holistic healing. Natalie would become director of patient care and well-being. They exchanged surprised glances, both humbled and tearful. Faith had done what ambition couldn't, and for once, hard work met heaven halfway. That evening, they celebrated in the hospital garden. Soft lights hung between trees, the scent of rain lingering. Staff gathered with laughter, music, and prayer. Michael lifted a small toast, simple, sincere, from the heart. "To second chances," he said, "and to the grace that makes them possible." Natalie raised her glass with a smile that reached eternity. "Amen to that." As the night thinned, they found a quiet bench. The hum of celebration drifted behind them. Stars shimmered through breaks in the clouds like scattered blessings. Michael turned to her, hesitant but honest. "I used to think love would cost me everything I built. And now?" she asked, voice soft as wind. "Now I know love built it with me." She laughed lightly, resting her head against his shoulder. "You finally sound like someone who prays." He smiled, looking at the sky. "Maybe I just started living like one." Her hand found his, no hesitation, no disguise. The silence between them was no longer awkward, it was holy. Love had stopped being a lesson. It had become a home, and purpose lived comfortably beside it. Weeks turned into months with Grace for company. Their initiative changed the hospital's culture quietly but completely. Patients felt seen, staff felt valued, Faith felt welcome. Even Collins, the old rival, softened over time. He thanked Michael one afternoon. Awkward but real. "Didn't think humility could lead," he said. Michael smiled. "It's the only kind that lasts." Seasons shifted, but the miracle remained. Natalie's laughter became part of the hospital's daily music. Michael's leadership turned fear into trust. They still argued sometimes about charts, coffee, or theology. But even their disagreements felt safe, anchored in grace. Love didn't erase imperfection. It illuminated it. And every day they chose each other again. One Sunday, they attended service together quietly. No press, no audience, just pews and presence. During worship, Michael closed his eyes, hand in hers. When the pastor said, "God restores double for your shame," Natalie's tears fell freely, unashamed, understood. He squeezed her hand, whispering, "He really did." And she smiled, whispering back, "We just had to let him." Outside, the city shone under a golden sky. Children laughed near the church steps, chasing pigeons. The world moved on, unaware of two lives rewritten. Michael wrapped an arm around her as they walked. "Do you ever think we'd end up here?" he asked. "Never," she said softly. But Grace did. And together they stepped into the sunlight, whole. Spring returned to Seattle dressed in gold and quiet rain. The hospital courtyard bloomed with tulips planted by volunteers. Natalie passed them every morning, whispering thanks for seasons that heal. Inside, laughter had replaced tension. Grace had become habit. Michael walked beside her now, not ahead, not behind, beside. Their names appeared together on the new hospital plaque. It read, "Where medicine meets mercy, healing multiplies." The Healing with Heart initiative grew faster than expected. Other hospitals called, wanting to learn their model. They traveled together, speaking, teaching, listening. Natalie led with stories, Michael with science. Every audience felt the invisible pulse between them. They didn't preach religion, but hope. Not perfection, but peace. And somehow that spoke louder than sermons. Back home, Seattle felt smaller and holier. The staff threw a small celebration in their honor. Banners read 2 lives, 1 purpose. Collins shook Michael's hand, awkward but sincere. "Guess you proved humility can lead after all," he said. Michael smiled. "You proved grace can catch up with anyone." They both laughed. Former rivals, now unlikely allies. Later that evening, the board offered them something unexpected. A proposal for an entire wing dedicated to holistic recovery. Natalie, the chair said. "We'd like you to co-direct with Dr. Reed." The room applauded as her eyes widened in disbelief. Michael reached for her hand under the table, grounding her. This wasn't ambition fulfilled, it was purpose recognized, and gratitude flooded the room like sunlight after rain. Construction began within months. Walls rose where once there had been bureaucracy. Michael designed the spaces with flow and light in mind. Natalie chose colors soft enough to comfort sorrow. Every patient room would hold both technology and tenderness. Their shared vision became tangible, brick by brick. Grace had learned architecture. During those months, long days blurred into gentle nights. They worked, laughed, prayed, sometimes argued over design. He wanted efficiency. She wanted atmosphere. But every disagreement ended with understanding. Love had become the art of finding the middle. One evening, while finalizing blueprints, he looked up. "You make even compromise feel like peace," he said. The grand opening drew families, patients, and staff alike. Cameras captured ribbons, speeches, and tears disguised as smiles. Michael stood at the podium but called Natalie forward. "This wing bears both our names," he said, voiceful. "But really, it belongs to the people who believed love still heals." Applause thundered, but she heard only his sincerity. It was better than any vow. As months passed, the wing filled with stories of renewal. Children recovered faster. Elders smiled sooner, staff stayed longer. Prayer circles formed quietly in break rooms. One janitor said, "It feels different here, like the walls forgive." Michael overheard and swallowed a lump of awe. Natalie touched his arm gently. "That's the sound of grace working." He nodded, eyes shining with silent praise. At home, life found rhythm beyond the hospital. They cooked simple meals, burned toast, laughed about it. He learned to rest. She learned to trust time. Evenings on the balcony became their sanctuary. Rain on glass turned into background music for gratitude. Love wasn't dramatic anymore, it was dependable. And that felt like eternity disguised as routine. One Sunday morning, the chapel filled with familiar faces. It wasn't a wedding, just Thanksgiving. Staff, patients, families gathered to dedicate the new space. Michael sat beside Natalie, hand loosely holding hers. The pastor spoke. "Some heal through medicine, others through mercy. But together they remind us God still writes new beginnings." Natalie's eyes glistened. Michael's heart said amen. After the service, children ran through the halls laughing. One girl, former patient, hugged Natalie around the waist. "You fixed my heart," she said proudly. Natalie smiled through tears. "You and God did that together." Michael crouched beside her, offering his stethoscope playfully. "Want to check if mine's working too?" The girl giggled. "It's loud. It's happy." That night they returned to the chapel alone. Candles flickered like memories learning to glow. Michael traced the wooden pew where he once prayed for mercy. Now he prayed for endurance, to keep loving well. Natalie sat beside him, head resting on his shoulder. "I used to ask God to change you," she whispered. "He did," he said, smiling. "Through you." Rain began again, tapping like a familiar hymn. They didn't move. They simply listened. The candlelight reflected on her cross necklace. He reached out, fingertips brushing it reverently. "Every time I doubted, this reminded me who was in charge." She laughed softly. "Then you finally learned to share leadership." "And love," he added quietly, meaning every syllable. Years later, photos of their work hung in hallways. Students studied their case files like scripture for compassion. The hospital's motto changed to match their lives: excellence with empathy. When visitors asked about its origin, people smiled knowingly. There was once a nurse and a surgeon who turned pain into purpose, and the story still made hearts stand taller. One evening, long after visiting hours, they walked the garden. The tulips Natalie planted years ago had multiplied. Michael knelt, adjusting one leaning stem carefully. "Still saving things," she teased. He looked up, warmth in his eyes. "Only what's worth saving." She smiled, kneeling beside him. "That's everything now." Together they watched the petals glisten under moonlight. They never sought titles or fame again. Their joy came quietly, in healed lives, restored families, redeemed time. Michael continued teaching surgeons about listening. Natalie mentored nurses on leading with heart. They grew older without growing distant. Faith aged beautifully between them, never fading. Theirs was a legacy of gentle permanence. On their 10th anniversary of the new wing, the hospital threw a tribute. Speeches, slideshows, laughter. stories replayed like miracles on loop. Michael turned to Natalie amid applause, eyes soft. Do you ever think about the day I mocked you? She smiled, tears forming without bitterness. Sometimes, she said, only to remember how far grace can travel. He kissed her forehead, an apology now eternal. That night, they walked home through drizzle and streetlight. The city gleamed, alive with echoes of their story. Cars hissed through puddles, and distant sirens sang familiar songs. Michael squeezed her hand as they crossed the street. You gave me faith, he said quietly. Not religion, faith. Natalie smiled, resting her head against his arm. And you gave me proof that people really can change. At home, the clock ticked slow and merciful. They sat by the window watching rain blur the skyline. No words, just shared silence that prayer understands. Michael finally spoke, voice soft as mist. If I could live it all again, even the hard parts, I would. Natalie's eyes met his, full of peace. So would I, because love doesn't skip the surgery, it heals through it. The candle on their table flickered once, then steadied. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant, like applause from heaven. They didn't move, only smiled at the familiar rhythm of grace. Two souls once fractured, now perfectly aligned. The surgeon and the nurse, both healed in ways unseen. Love hadn't asked them to choose, it taught them to balance. And under the silver light of a forgiving sky, they simply remained. And maybe this story spoke to you, because you know what it's like to be humiliated, to be misunderstood, or to be the one who needed grace more than applause. If God can turn a moment of shame into a lifetime of purpose for Natalie and Michael, He can do the same for you. Don't leave without sharing this story. Someone you love needs to remember that redemption is still possible. Comment "Grace still works" if you believe that God is never finished writing your story. Subscribe to Redeemed Hearts for more stories where faith rewrites what pain tried to end.